Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Andres Gonzalez. I'm Program Manager for Environmental Justice at Liberty Hill, and I use he, him pronouns. Buenas a todos. Mi nombre es Andrés González y uso los pronombres él. Soy gerente de programación de justicia ambiental de la Fundación Liberty Hill. For today's event, we please ask that everyone please select an interpretation channel that corresponds to your language needs. If, for example, you are English monolingual speaker or Spanish monolingual speaker, meaning if you only speak English or if you only speak Spanish, to please select their respective channels. So only English speakers will select the English channel and only Spanish speakers will select the Spanish channel. We will have Spanish speakers today in order to ensure that translation works accordingly. Buenas a todos. Para el evento de hoy les pido que si por favor tienen necesidades de idioma, si por ejemplo solo hablan español o solo hablan inglés, que por favor hunden interpretación, el globito que va a estar ubicado en la barra de abajo y seleccionan el canal que corresponde a sus necesidades de idioma. Por ejemplo, si solo habla inglés, selecciona el canal de inglés. Y si solo habla español, selecciona el canal de español. Hoy vamos a tener locutoras y locutores que solo hablan uno o el otro, hablan solo un idioma, entonces va a ser importante para poder implementar la interpretación. Gracias. Thank you, everyone. We go on to the next slide, please. And before we start today, I just wanted to do a land acknowledgement for today's Climate Equity LA series focused on workers and extreme heat. The city of Los Angeles acknowledges the original indigenous residents of this land. Los Angeles was founded on unceded land of the Tongva, Chumash, and Tataviam nations. By drawing on indigenous knowledge and the wisdom of Los Angeles's diverse cultures and experiences, we seek to create an equitable decision-making approach to achieving climate solutions for present and future residents of Los Angeles while paying proper respect to the history of this land and its original stewards. The city will seek to build reciprocity with local indigenous communities while addressing local climate change impacts, building frontline climate community resilience, and inspiring Angelenos today and tomorrow to respect the land, water, nature, and air that we share in order to live, play, pray, and work. I will say too, as we think through land acknowledgement, how are we thinking through a return of our relationship to nature and to the original peoples that inhabited and called these lands home? Thank you. And with that, I shall go ahead and pass it on to Director Marta Ceguera of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. Really appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Again, I'm Marta Ceguera, the Director of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office and also the Chief Heat Officer. Today is really special to me because both of my parents were agricultural workers. My dad was a farm worker, later a cannery worker, and both he and my mother in the canneries suffered from extreme heat, other workers' rights violations. So really, sometimes I realized that what brought me to this work was hearing my mom and dad organize around worker health and safety issues. But today we're here to talk about extreme heat. And unfortunately, extreme heat and the new normal of long heat seasons change how we live and work. Yet awareness of this silent threat is dangerously insufficient. We are hopeful that through intentional dialogue and with our heat action plan, climate vulnerability assessment, stakeholder engagement, and this heat relief for LA campaign, along with the city's climate investments, the federal investments, we can all catalyze interventions, policies, and assets that create cooler, healthier cities that protect people and prevent harm while maintaining a livable Los Angeles. Heat's disproportionate impact on workers in cities and the tragic reality that more and more people are flocking to cities for work due to escalating climate impacts where they once lived across the world moves us to explore how we can prevent harm and perhaps with the support of employers, workers, unions, nonprofits, universities, governments, and everyday advocates who care about these climate threats and our future, we can prevent harm. and more protective outdoor worker protections for our essential workers. So as I said earlier, I started my vocation in worker health and safety and climate advocacy in the 90s at the UCLA Labor Occupational Safety and Health Program project. So this workshop brings me full circle to one of the many reasons I was drawn to this work, the protection of rights of workers who are being exposed to harsh working conditions, chemicals, and pesticides. They suffer from heat injury and survive many other assaults from workplace hazards. So why do you think that this climate director and chief heat officer aligns with workers' voices and these heat dialogues with workers are so important? Well, I don't think I can do that answer justice, but let's try with this. From the beginning of the environmental movement, worker health and safety rights were front and center. Both OSHA and EPA were created around the same time to respond to the massive environmental assaults of the Industrial Revolution and the unchecked harm it was causing against people, workers, and our biodiversity. These issues have always gone hand in hand from my perspective. One cannot be solved without the other being addressed. We must address these issues in tandem and work against the silos that we have created. However, allow me to focus specifically here on heat and outdoor workers. Currently, 20% of all workers are outdoor workers, or about 35 million have outdoor jobs that place them at higher risk for heat injury and death. Outdoor workers in the United States face 4 times as many days with hazardous heat by mid-century if action isn't taken to reduce these greenhouse gas emissions, according to reports from the Union of Concerned Scientists. Also, the CDC reports that outdoor workers in the United States face up to 35 times the risk of dying from heat exposure than the general population. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommend employers reduce work schedules when the heat index amounts to heat and humidity that reaches over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. But this is not enough. We know that a steep increase in temperatures from heat is also the primary source of heat injury. Our bodies must be given time to adapt to extreme heat. Some solutions could be reduced work schedules, more breaks, only working in hours without direct sunlight, adding more water and shade, and many things that help us stay cool and healthy during the work schedule. Currently, there are no federal heat safety standards to protect outdoor workers during extreme heat, and only 2 states, California and Washington, have permanent heat standards for outdoor worker safety. However, we do know that Senator Alex Padilla has introduced legislation. California has also introduced legislation to protect workers, and our speakers today will give you more information about this critically life-saving legislation and how you can help. So if the city of LA does not regulate worker safety, why are we bringing attention to this in our series? Cal OSHA does regulate worker health and safety, yet cities are uniquely positioned to engage and communicate with employers and workers on how they can prevent preventable heat injury and align with the state and the federal laws to protect them. It's one of the areas we are focusing on with our Heat Relief for LA campaign, because outdoor workers are among the most vulnerable for heat injury risk. Slide 1, Rebecca, on the Heat Relief campaign, the diagram. So here I just wanted to give you an overview of what the city is doing and how it's relating it to work going on across the city for extreme heat and climate adaptation. One of the ways that we're communicating the risks of extreme heat and what everybody can do is through the CELA series and these heat dialogues. The other is the Heat Relief for LA campaign that we just launched last week. And today you'll also learn about the UCLA heat focus groups conducted by UCLA Master's Public Policy students from Luskin. We also have the social media campaign, a mass media campaign, other UCLA heat research projects, and the network that we're expanding that currently has over 70 organizations and businesses that will help us with the work that we're doing to prevent further harm. So one of the last things that I wanted to share with you is the cost of extreme heat to our economy and families as it relates to work. Staying home on hot days would ultimately cost an average outdoor worker about $1,700 annually, amounting to about $55 billion annually for all outdoor workers. The most severe impacts will be on construction workers, gardeners, and oil and gas workers who risk losing about $15 billion in earnings annually, followed by the installation, maintenance, and repair occupations who could lose another $11 billion. Another study by Vivid Economics commissioned by the Armstrong Center states that this results in a moderate climate change scenario by 2050 could see losses of up to 20% of an annual effective labor hours and as much as 50% in the hottest months. This in turn could reduce economic output by over 30%. Both economic output and lost work hours are highly concentrated in sectors where work has high intensity and is conducted outdoors. So as we know, the most impacted workers in Los Angeles and in California are people of color, and they will be hit especially hard by extreme heat. People who identify as African American, Black, Latino, Mexican, Central American are all disproportionately represented in outdoor work, compromising about 40% of the outdoor workforce, despite making up only 32% of the US population. We have groups of people already experiencing systemic racism in the United States, and extreme heat and climate change impacts exacerbate those existing inequities. Well, those of us here really know that workers are an integral part of our families. Our communities are essential to a livable, thriving Los Angeles and thriving economy, yet we have forgotten or often forgotten them, and they have become invisible to federal legislators, and many die from work-related harm and injury, and also those injuries are underreported. So for me, the connection of worker health and safety and climate solutions is obvious. We must both reduce greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution to protect them, and create immediate systems changes to relay to employers, unions, and workers to know how to protect the workers, who are the foundation of our society. It brings me great satisfaction to open this conversation and present those voices and speakers to you, and come full circle in respecting the example that was brought to me by my mother and father and mentors like Mary Ann Brown, the founding director of the UCLA Labor Occupational Safety and Health Program. So now I'll take a pause. And again, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our panel. In our panel today, we have, I'll name them all and then I'll come back to Patricia. First, we have Patricia Rizzo, the community health educator and promoter for the UCLA Labor Occupational Safety and Health Program, Ambición y Compromiso. We also have Enrique Huerta, policy director for extreme heat with the Climate Resolve. We also have for you today, Aretha, my screen isn't working, my apologies, give me 1 second. Aretha Wormsley, the lead community organizer from Scope LA, and Kevin Riley, the director of the UCLA Labor Occupational Safety and Health Program. So thank you all so very much for joining us here today. And we will start with Patricia. Patricia, so workers are facing more extreme heat. And this year, they're expected to face even greater increases of extreme heat in indoors and outdoors in the workplace. What impacts are you hearing about and seeing when you have conversations with workers as a community health educator? What impacts these workers the most?
Gracias, Marta. Gracias por la invitación. Gracias por la presentación. Quiero hablar un poquito más de mi experiencia como educadora, no solamente en los temas de salud y seguridad laboral, pero soy promotora comunitaria gracias a un programa de promotores de Esperanza Community Housing, ¿verdad? Entonces, que en este programa cursé mi curso de promotora, ya tengo 17 años, y tengo aproximadamente casi los mismos trabajando en este tema de la salud y seguridad laboral y muchos otros aspectos de la salud comunitaria. Entonces, la pregunta, ¿verdad?, que Marta me acaba de hacer, puedo compartir acerca de la perspectiva de los trabajadores precisamente por la oportunidad que he tenido de estar en contacto con muchísimos trabajadores a través de todos estos años. Son las condiciones que los trabajadores se enfrentan en sus lugares de trabajo, sobre todo hablando específicamente de este tema, del calor extremo, ¿verdad? Ellos que trabajan al aire libre en temporadas de calor, están expuestos a condiciones principalmente como la humedad, la temperatura y el calor que su cuerpo genera por el esfuerzo físico para realizar sus tareas de trabajo. Y esas son condiciones que los ponen en riesgo de sufrir enfermedades que pueden ser ocasionadas por esa exposición a las altas temperaturas, al calor. También hay otros factores como la aclimatación que aumentan el riesgo para los trabajadores, ¿verdad? Trabajadores que tal vez en sus trabajos previos no han estado expuestos al clima excesivo de calor y de pronto empiezan un trabajo donde tienen que estar en esta exposición de temperaturas altas. Eso les pone en más riesgo a ellos, ¿no? También hay otros factores como factores personales, que puede ser su edad, el estado de hidratación de esta persona, el nivel de conocimiento sobre el cuidado de salud ante el calor excesivo, perdón. Esos son factores que agregan aún más el riesgo, ¿verdad?, de sufrir una enfermedad por el calor. Y además, si alguna vez este trabajador o trabajadora ha sufrido anteriormente una enfermedad por calor, le hace aún más vulnerable. Entonces, los trabajadores y trabajadoras que se ven más impactados por estas condiciones son de varias industrias, ¿no? Pero en general, estas condiciones impactan a todo trabajador, ya sea que trabaje bajo techo o al aire libre, si en el lugar de trabajo no está recibiendo las protecciones apropiadas. Y por mencionarles algunos ejemplos de trabajadores a quienes les impacta más el calor extremo, tenemos a los trabajadores de construcción, los trabajadores que lavan carros, los trabajadores jornaleros, los que trabajan en bodegas y fábricas, a los trabajadores de la industria de la costura, a los jardineros. Y también es bien curioso, ¿no?, que no pensamos en los trabajadores que trabajan de puerta en puerta. Y unos ejemplos de ellos son los organizadores, que tienen que ir a la comunidad, ¿verdad?, a trabajar de puerta en puerta. Y otro ejemplo, somos las promotoras como yo, que nos toca trabajar en temporadas de verano, ¿verdad?, que donde estamos expuestas al calor y vamos haciendo la promoción de la salud, tocando puertas. También estamos en riesgo de sufrir alguna enfermedad por calor. Otro punto importante que me gustaría agregar, basado en la experiencia del contacto con los trabajadores, ¿qué es lo que ellos necesitan? ¿Cuáles son esos recursos que los trabajadores necesitan? Ellos nos han hecho saber que a ellos les importa conocer qué son sus derechos en el trabajo. ¿Cómo pueden participar activamente cumpliendo sus responsabilidades como trabajadores o trabajadoras? ¿Cómo ellos pueden desarrollar su liderazgo para abogar efectivamente por mejores condiciones de trabajo? Todos los trabajadores, según nos han comentado en nuestros talleres, también necesitan saber cuáles son esos peligros que pueden haber en mi lugar de trabajo, ¿no?, para identificarlos, cómo los podemos controlar. Pero algo que comúnmente ellos también nos dicen es, ok, si yo estoy informado acerca de todo esto, qué son los peligros, cómo los identifico, cómo se pueden controlar, eso no es suficiente. También los empleadores deben estar informados de esto mismo que nosotros nos están informando. Es decir, que nuestros empleadores deben de estar capacitados en estos temas porque en nuestros lugares de trabajo no escuchamos hablar de esto, no nos dicen, vamos a hablar de ese tema que es importante ya que ustedes van a trabajar bajo calor excesivo. Estas son las precauciones que deben de tomar, esto es lo que les vamos a proveer. Eso no sucede, entonces los trabajadores frecuentemente nos hacen saber que no solo ellos como trabajadores deben estar capacitados en esto, pero también los empleadores.
Muchas gracias, Patricia. Fue muy importante lo que has compartido con nosotros y es una buena entrada para Enrique Huerta. Oh, pardon. Thank you, Patricia, so much for that. This is a really good segue to now introduce Enrique Huerta, the Policy Director for Climate Resolve. Enrique, can you continue to provide some context for heat risks to workers and the relevant state legislation that you've been working on and how that, and perhaps how the audience here can participate in supporting the work that you're doing?
Sure thing, Marta. Thank you for the invitation to speak about outdoor workers and the laws meant to protect them from extreme heat. I'm Enrique Huerta, and I'm the Legislative Director here at Climate Resolve. I haven't always been knocking on doors in Sacramento. In fact, back in high school, I worked for my father doing construction work. I got a tiny taste of what it means to toil under the sun. Now, when one thinks of contractors, one may imagine a hard hat wearing worker building fancy homes. Me, I dug trenches. I spent hours shoveling piles and piles of sand and gravel and unloading and loading hundreds of pieces of lumber. Needless to say, it was really hard work. I did all the grunt work and decided early on that I didn't have the chops to do this for a living. I was lucky. For others who have to toil under a brutal sun, each passing minute making your body work harder than the next, they're in serious danger. We know that heat affects our cognition and physiology. When temperatures exceed 85 degrees, chances of serious injury go up by 7%. When temperatures exceed 100 degrees, risk factors go up to 15%. Now, if you're working in an air-conditioned office and you doze off, chances are you'll be okay. Maybe you'll get a little side-eye from your boss, but that's it. If you doze off around heavy machinery, you're in serious trouble. Thankfully, in 2006, the state adopted the Outdoor Heat Illness Prevention Law, later named the Maria Isabel Vasquez Jimenez Law, after a 17-year-old pregnant teen succumbed to heat stroke while pruning grapes. If this law would have been in place during the early 90s when I was doing contracting work, I would have had to have been provided with access to free drinking water throughout the day, access to shade when temperatures exceed 80 degrees, 10-minute breaks every 2 hours. For the first 2 weeks working outdoors, acclimatization period so that workers can get used to the heat. High heat procedures when temperatures exceed 95 degrees, things like implementing the buddy system and having some kind of communication device so that one can constantly check in with supervisors. And finally, all outdoor workplaces would have to provide a heat illness prevention plan. Unfortunately, the law is ineffective as it only applies to certain outdoor occupations like agricultural work, construction, landscaping, and oil fields where extraction of oil and gas take place. All other outdoor industries, like the ones that Patricia just mentioned, are exempt. To make matters worse, there is a critical shortage of inspectors, with over 1/3 of the positions unfilled at Cal OSHA, and a total of 35 Spanish-speaking inspectors available for the entire state. This is concerning as meteorologists predict that the next 5 years will be the hottest on record. Think about that. Last September, Los Angeles experienced 14 consecutive days with temperatures above 100 degrees. It was so serious that the California Department of Public Health is now doing an analysis of that heat wave to see how many people were seriously injured and what the mortality rates were. We also know that extreme heat kills more Californians than all other climate hazards, with pronounced impacts on historically marginalized communities. The same communities with high heat exposure due to heat-absorbing homes and infrastructure, the same communities with a high degree of residents with pre-existing medical condition that heat makes worse, and the very same communities who lack the resources to prepare and bounce back when climate shock strikes. Also, there is no indoor heat illness protection standard either. SB 1167, approved in 2016, mandated that the Cal OSHA Standards Board review and adopt a law by January 2019. No law is in the books. There are alternatives to enforcement. Climate Resolve, along with many partners, have advocated over the years for hundreds of millions of dollars available to cool our communities. Integrated solutions like more trees, more cool surfaces, more covered shade structures, more public drinking fountains, more covered bus stops. Unfortunately, the governor is looking to balance our state budget this year by slashing these funds by up to 40%. This is problematic, as our next speaker will tell you. Our communities are in dire need of cooling down the public right-of-way so that outdoor workers that rely on it stand a fighting chance during heat waves that are getting longer, more frequent, and hotter.
Thank you so much, Enrique. That's a lot of really valuable information that basically I want to transcribe and use in my speeches. And I think it's going to be a great segue, though, to our next speaker, Aretha Wormsley from Scope LA. Aretha, you're here to talk to us about your observations of how extreme heat affects the community members that you work with, whom are also workers, and the impacts that you've seen and learned about with that work that you do at Scope LA. Please go ahead and share with us your impressions, your observations.
Okay, like she said, my name is Aretha. I've been with Scope more than 17 years. I've been a canvasser, and I'm a leader and organizer. And you know, what made me get involved with this, I'll start with that, is that I couldn't believe there was a place where I could talk about what I've always talked about. Even when I was a kid, I used to talk about the weather. It was just something I was always interested in my community. I love my community. And with that being said, I wrote something down, so I want to make sure I get it right. I don't want to forget anything that my thoughts, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what I've seen in my community with the workers is that this is what's going on with us. High utility bills, this is what they're discussing. High utility bills, inadequate housing, no proper insulation or cooling, lack of green spaces in South LA, has no tree canopies, everywhere from our schools to our homes to the lack of community spaces. Our communities have very few refuge when it gets to really hot, not to mention our homeless here in South LA. As someone who has a child that's in mental health, which we know that during the heat waves and high temps, people suffer mental fatigue, irritability, aggression, and higher rates of suicide have been noted. That the heat has an impact on our stress, anger, and fatigue, especially in places like Los Angeles, where temps regularly go over 90. And since I've been here all my life, you know, sometimes it's just really unbearable, the heat that goes on in South LA. On top of the stress and the rent and the burden of utility, the utility bill, burden of pollution, over policing, and lack of economic opportunity, the heat only exacerbates the stress people are already facing. So on top of everything else, you have to deal with heat. There's no air conditioner in your home. And, you know, that brings up the higher rate of ER visits. And that makes our overcrowded ER because everybody's calling because they need some type of relief. Some people just want to go to the hospital literally to get some air conditioner. They're like, I'd rather be here than there. And that's sad to have that, you know, in our community. And I will say that in closing, the city needs to provide more services for residents, communities like South Los Angeles, we have borne the brunt of climate and crisis and racist policies for a long time, and it's enough is enough. We need to lower utility bills, new renewable energies that are free or to low cost to low income communities, safe and healthy housing, more parks, good union jobs, and targeted investments in our communities. So that's what we need right now. We need more investments because at the end of the day, I don't know. I don't know if it's only me that feels this way. We barely had heat since COVID. It's like been off here, hot there, cold there. But I don't want to see the day where the heat is actually more consistent than the cool. And so we need to put these things in place. And thank you so much for letting me talk to you, because as a community member here in South LA and Scope, I've seen a lot of people suffer, our workers, police officers, people that do the polls. And so it's time to help our homeless. It's time to get some things in place before we have to face these heat waves that are coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Aretha, from Scope LA for those words of wisdom. Definitely empathize with everything that you say and agree with everything that you're recommending for the city to invest in and pay attention to. And I think it's a good opportunity also to create a better, greener workforce that improves the historically disinvested communities of Los Angeles. And I think that that's probably a good segue to invite our next speaker or panelist, Kevin Riley, the Director of the Labor, Occupational Safety and Health Program. So Kevin, thank you for being with us. And there's so many things that we could talk about with you, but basically, we want you to speak to your advocacy role for workers, climate, and extreme heat, and explain to us a little bit about what you recommend that the city and government as a whole can do for outdoor workers.
Great. Well, thank you, Martha, and really happy to be here tonight to share a few thoughts on this issue. And I have to say, I in many of my thoughts will probably echo what we've already heard from some of the previous speakers. So this has been a really interesting discussion. I want to just start out, first of all, by saying how pleased I am that we have this particular forum to talk about the particular issues facing workers in regard to extreme heat. I think it's important to acknowledge that while extreme heat and other climate issues impact the community at large, there's some very particular things that impact workers that are different from the general public. Workers are often exposed to heat with greater frequency or duration and intensity than other members of the public. And often those exposures to heat are determined by the requirements of their job and by their employers. Workers, when they're at work, don't have the same kind of freedom and ability to take protective actions that we may if we're home, if we're in our communities. So I think it's important as a kind of contextual thing to acknowledge that there are some very particular constraints when it comes to finding ways to protect workers in particular that I think we all need to just be aware of. I'm really glad Enrique took some time to explain the legal requirements under Cal OSHA for protecting workers here. And I want to just echo a couple of things and reframe one thing that Enrique said. So Martha, as you mentioned at the beginning of your talk, California is one of only 2 or 3 states in the country at this point that has any sort of legal requirements that employers have to follow when heat exceeds a certain temperature. So here in California, we've had our Cal OSHA standard for outdoor workers since 2005, 2006. Basically, those requirements, that standard requires employers to begin taking action to protect workers from exposure to heat initially when the heat reaches 80 degrees, and then there's some additional requirements when we reach 95 degrees, and it includes provision of water, and rest, and shade. I do want to say, Enrique, my understanding is actually that the standard as it's currently written applies to any employers that have workers that are working outdoors. So I know that Cal OSHA has done some targeted work around agriculture and construction and a few other industries, but that standard actually does apply to any industry where you may have workers that are outdoors and exposed to the elements. What we don't have right now, and what there is a lot of advocacy around, is a standard to protect workers from indoor heat. And of course, in a lot of ways, that's also related to climate issues. I mean, you have in LA, you have these large warehouses that get very hot in the summertime, that are indoor workspaces that are not well air conditioned. the heat in those facilities are directly impacted by the heat in the environment. Garment shops, car washes, other places where there are indoor spaces. Currently, worker organizations and advocates are pushing Cal OSHA to get a new standard in place that would extend to indoor workers as well. There's actually been a fair bit of debate right now as to when that standard would take effect. That is to say, at what temperature would employers have to start taking measures? So the last version of the standard we've seen says that employers would have to begin taking measures at 82 degrees, which is a little bit higher than our outdoor standard. And worker advocates are pushing right now to get Cal OSHA to bring it down so that it matches the outdoor standard. But for those of you who might be interested in getting involved in those, those discussions, Cal OSHA has a series of public hearings and opportunities to weigh in. And I think it's a really important moment for the agency to be hearing from worker organizations and community organizations about the importance of having a strong standard in place. Just a couple of final things I wanted to add to the discussion here that could be useful. One recommendation, I want to kind of echo something that Patricia said, which is that I think as far as the city's outreach and education work goes, I think it is very important in terms of the worker side to do outreach and education to employers as well. Employers need to know that they have responsibilities under state law that they're required to follow, and that they can face fines if they're not taking proper measures to protect their workers. So that's important. That needs to go hand in hand, I think, with education to workers themselves. Another thing I was thinking about, Martha, you had also mentioned the issue of underreporting, the fact that we're likely seeing impacts of heat to workers that are not being captured in sort of our official recording mechanisms. And I think that's a really important thing to emphasize as well. I think a lot of workers may show up in the healthcare system with heat illness issues, and healthcare providers may not ask about work. And I think that's another thing that the city could potentially play a role, is to be providing some guidance to healthcare providers in the city about how to ask about work and how to capture the connections that we may see between work conditions and heat illness or other sorts of health impacts. That's sort of an area that I feel like there's a considerable gap that needs to be closed. And then the last thing I'll say here is that, here in Los Angeles, we have such a rich landscape of worker organizations, of unions, of worker centers, of other advocacy groups. And I think that both opens an opportunity for the city to collaborate with those organizations who have very rich, deep connections with their members in a lot of these industries that are most impacted. And also, in some cases, particularly on the union side, unions have found some creative ways of building protections into their collective bargaining agreements, say, for their members. And I think it would be a really valuable exercise to also be reaching out to unions and almost gathering some best practices to understand, what kind of creative strategies had they found to extend protections to their members that go above and beyond the minimum requirements of Cal OSHA. I think this is a moment in time where we all need to be thinking really creatively, looking for these creative ideas and finding different ways that we can be sharing strategies to adapt going forward, because these heat issues are clearly not going away. They're only going to become more extreme. And so I think that's an area, it's the resources that I think are valuable for the city to tap into as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. That's a really great summary of so many of the issues that were touched upon, but also a little bit more depth on worker protections. I do want to resurface something Enrique said earlier, and really it was a segue between protecting workers, reducing emissions, and climate change, and worker protections, right? I think it is important to recognize that if we have outdoor workers doing construction or gardening, or even walking to the bus stop, first mile, last mile of their mobility, the more shade structures we have, the more tree canopy we have, the more hydration stations, the more places are open to be a refuge for people walking to and from work or to the bus, the better protection we have for our workers who are outdoors as well. So I guess what I'm trying to establish here is this interconnection between the more global solutions for our climate and for our environment, to reduce pollution, and how connected that is to our workers, because often our workers live in these same historically disinvested communities, like Aretha was saying earlier, where we lack open space, where we lack resources, where we lack tree canopy again. So but it is a challenge, right? To communicate and convey this to everyday people. So maybe I'll go back to Aretha for a second and ask her first, how do you convey the need for people to take action in our communities, so that we can both improve our climate for our communities, but also for our outdoor workers? I hope that makes, I hope I didn't convolute that too much, Aretha. Or Agustin, if you're there. All right. Well, I will then go back to Enrique. Enrique, please go ahead and respond on the importance of conveying that information to everyday people and how we convey that connection.
Yeah, that's a good question, Marta. So we know that there have been a few extreme heat awareness campaigns in the past, and those are great. We need more of those. But we're talking about outdoor workers who don't have the luxury of altering their behavior when it gets hot. And so these remain our hard to reach sector when it comes to protecting them against extreme heat. And that's why it's vital that we not only ensure that Cal OSHA is enforcing the law, ensure that the Cal OSHA Standards Board is reviewing and adopting the most impactful laws for indoor workers as well, but we need to involve, and I think Riley brought this up, we need to involve all of the nonprofit organizations that are on the ground now working directly with these workers. These are our trusted messengers. They have made inroads over many, many years of hard and diligent work. And we need to ensure that they act as third-party implementers of the law. On top of that, we need to make this an all of society approach, an all of government approach. So we need to protect workers at their work sites, but we also need to protect them at home. And for those that rely on public transportation, on their way to these transportation hubs. This is where local government can really make an impact. We need to ensure that the many grant programs that the state has established over the years to address extreme heat. Our prior speaker mentioned the need for weatherizing our homes. Well, we do have programs that do that. We have the low-income weatherization program that has been around for years. We have many other programs for urban forestry. We have programs coming online for community resilience centers. The problem is that they're all in their own silos and solutions are being dispensed one solution at a time when we need solutions with multi-benefits. So it's an all of society problem that requires an all of government approach.
Great, thank you, Enrique. I see, Kevin, your hand is up, and right before I transition over to Kevin and end this Q&A session, I want to say that our campaign is multilingual. We're creating materials in at least 5 different languages and making sure that this material gets distributed to, the communities that are hard to reach. And we've involved, in addition to great organizations that represent those communities, we've involved ethnic media so that they can also put out this information, because it's critically important that people understand that we don't have the summers of 10 years ago. We have more frequent, intense, longer lasting heat waves and heat seasons that put our bodies at risk, whether we're an outdoor worker or walking to the bus. And in these vulnerable communities, those ER visits are excessive and higher, but also preventable. I just wanted to make that point about the importance of conveying and communicating, not just in different languages, but making it easier and accessible in terms of everyday language. Kevin, we'll end with you.
Thanks. I just wanted to add one other addition to this discussion. So whenever we train on Cal OSHA standards or discuss Cal OSHA, we always emphasize the fact that, you know, Cal OSHA standards, those requirements, they're a floor, they're not a ceiling, right? That's the basic measures that employers have to take. Employers can go above and beyond. And in some cases, for example, unions have used contract language to negotiate stronger protections around heat or other hazards. That's one mechanism. You know, a city or local government can also take measures that could go above and beyond those Cal OSHA standards. So kind of alluding to Michelle's question in the chat about, you know, do we think about suspending outdoor work if the temperature rises above a certain threshold? Well, that's not required by Cal OSHA, but that's certainly something, for example, that an employer could do, or it's something that, say, the city of LA could adopt, you know, with the sort of understanding that that's an important kind of a tool to protect a broad swath of the population that's not being protected otherwise. So just to kind of throw into the mix here that, you know, Cal OSHA is an important piece of this, but there's more that can be done even better than beyond.
Absolutely, 100%. And yes, I agree that cities and local governments are uniquely positioned to be able to convey that kind of information and even help to enforce it. So thank you so much for saying that. So now I'm going to turn it over to Andres Gonzalez, who's going to transition us into our next presentation from our UCLA students who did the focus groups on heat. Andres.
Dale, how y'all doing? Thank you so much, Marta, and to all the speakers. And so next up, we have the incredible UCLA Masters of Public Policy students, Hannah Abdelati, as well as Selena Melgoza, speaking on behalf of their wider team as part of the parallel heat focus groups across different organizations, different communities in Los Angeles. And they'll be sharing some of their key insights today. So thank you, all you, Hannah, and all you, Selena.
Yes, thank you, Andres, and thank you so much, Marta, for including us in this presentation, and also to all the speakers for all of their incredible insights today. So we're going to be presenting just a snippet of what we have been working on with our focus groups and survey work for our report that we will be releasing to address heat inequities for frontline communities in Los Angeles. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just to set some context, as we've been discussing extensively throughout this series and today, as the century progresses, residents of Los Angeles can expect to endure more heat waves that are hotter and last longer as a result of climate change. We found that even the median census tracts in Los Angeles will experience 31% more of these extreme heat days by 2050. But we don't need to look into the future to see how this will impact the health of Angelenos, as we are already experiencing nearly 1,200 additional ER visits due to heat-related illnesses for each extreme day. And as we've been discussing, outdoor workers are disproportionately represented in these values. However, not all communities are impacted by these health impacts equitably. It's important to acknowledge that historical redlining has caused intergenerational inequities in the socioeconomic determinants of health among today's Angelenos, particularly in Black, Latinx, and Indigenous communities. So in order to see which areas of Los Angeles are at higher risks of extreme heat impacts, we have created an index map that combines demographic, health, and environmental factors into a single map that shows the risk to extreme heat faced by these communities. And as you can see in this map, Angelenos living in the San Fernando Valley, the East Side, Westlake, South LA, and Wilmington are most at risk of the impacts of extreme heat. And it's also important to note that these are all previously redline areas. The highest risk communities have significantly higher populations of residents of color and of immigrant communities and of much lower household incomes. Next slide. So we have partnered with CEMO to address the following policy question. How can CEMO best incorporate frontline community needs, perspectives, and preferences into equitable heat adaptation policy for Los Angeles, along with themes around collaboration, best practices, inequity, community agency, and effectiveness to inform LA's first heat action plan and climate vulnerability assessment. So, next slide. Thanks.
So our data collection focused on a mixed method approach ranging from qualitative and quantitative analysis. So for this brief presentation, we really just want to focus more about our focus groups and our online paper survey. Next slide. So to gather frontline community perspectives, we conducted 7 focus groups in February and March of 2023 in collaboration with CEMO, Liberty Hill, and participating CBOs pictured here. In total, we had about 68 participants across all the focus groups, all of which were compensated for their time. Additionally, to practice language justice, some of our focus groups were conducted in Spanish and indigenous language, such as Quiché and Zapotec, to name a few. During our research, we wanted to be intentional about the organizations we reach out to and the issue areas which they covered. For this reason, we thought it was important to uplift these perspectives, especially the voices of labor organizations, particularly as outdoor workers have been shown in research to be one of the most vulnerable populations to extreme heat. We've had the opportunity to work with the Black Workers Center, the Labor Community Strategy Center, as well as Cielo and Caracen, who tend to serve working poor and blue collar workers. Although other organizations are not specifically targeted to outdoor workers, participants in these groups still shared their experiences of their time at work and also of their loved ones during extreme heat events. Next slide. So in our focus groups, we asked a total of 10 discussion questions about their experiences with heat in their communities. And as you can see pictured here, the bigger the themes are in relation to the frequency of the topics that the focus group participants center their discussions on. And we saw that community level interventions such as community gardens and parks, at-home interventions such as AC units and energy utility assistant programs, and communication and outreach were the topics that were discussed in all the focus groups the most. Next slide.
And we next distributed our online survey to gather more input from community members who we were unable to speak to in our focus groups due to limited time. In our online survey, we had 33 questions where we asked respondents about their perceptions of heat risk, access to resources at home, at work, and in their neighborhoods, as well as their policy preferences to build heat resilience. Next slide. We had a total of 546 respondents to our survey, with 334 identifying as frontline community members. For the purposes of this report, we've defined frontline community members as individuals who identify themselves as non-white or identified as white with an annual household income under $50,000, as our mapping analysis identified this to be the lowest income quartile in Los Angeles. And as you can see on the map on the slide, most of our responses were concentrated in Westlake and South LA, which our index showed to be highly vulnerable areas to heat.
Next.
And jumping into our findings, during our focus group session, many participants shared their experiences or their loved ones' experiences working outdoors during extreme heat events. As our first quote shows, a construction worker shares how suffocating it is to work under the heat. And then our second quote highlights how a husband who works in installing roofs has to buy their own safety gear to protect themselves against the sun and also deals with unbearable pain working under heat. Our subject matter experts also identified outdoor workers as being one of the most vulnerable populations to extreme heat. And as highlighted by all of the speakers today, the main heat-related workplace interventions in LA stem from Cal OSHA regulations. But Angelinos continue to express heat exposure at work. And this is an indication that more needs to be done to regulate and enforce protections, which will minimize heat-related illnesses in the workplace, particularly among outdoor workers. Next slide. So cities such as Miami and Ahmedabad have included workers' rights and protections in their heat plans. These protections mandate minimum access to shade and water at work and decreased outdoor work hours during heat waves. However, in Los Angeles, participants often mentioned that these protections were not provided consistently. As you can see in our quotes again, our first quote shows how employers have yet to address heat training or how to manage heat exposure and heat stroke in the workplace. Secondly, our quote from another participant expressed that they do not receive any additional accommodations during extreme heat times. Next slide.
Next, our next finding shows that resilience centers and cooling centers were desired by frontline communities as a resource, but not the only resource to build resilience against heat. 53% of our frontline survey respondents mentioned that they would like to see resilience centers and cooling centers in their neighborhood. So in our survey, we found that they were a very popular option among frontline communities. Our focus groups also had individuals expressing an interest in cooling centers, with many mentioning that there needs to be more awareness done about what they are and where they are located, as mentioned on this slide. However, as highlighted in the quote on this slide, one of our survey respondents from our focus groups also indicated that cooling centers follow the assumption that people have the time and resources to just drop everything to go. It's almost like a bandage because it does not take into account the daily lives of working people. As a result, it's important to note that there must be more that needs to be done in order to adapt to extreme heat to better accommodate people's schedules and obligations. Next slide. And then another finding that we wanted to highlight is that frontline individuals also face challenges in their daily commute due to a lack of shade structures in their neighborhoods, such as bus shelters. Our survey found that 44% of frontline individuals would prioritize seeing more shade structures in their communities. As shown in the quote on the slide, the community is frustrated with existing infrastructure, as one participant mentioned that they have nowhere to sit or nowhere to cover themselves when walking or waiting for the bus. Next slide. So why is this problematic? We found that 57% of our survey respondents commute daily without a personal car using some form of active or public transportation, such as walking, taking the bus, or biking. These individuals, who are often low-income workers, are most exposed to heat on a daily basis, with no access to relief through shading from bus shelters on hot days. Next slide.
We created a community matrix for our policy recommendations to help us put forward policies to CEMO. And for the sake of time, we'll highlight the recommendation that focuses on worker protections. Next slide. So currently, heat-related workplace training programs are decentralized across entities in the city. And we spoke about this briefly. And this acts to reduce community awareness about these programs and likely contributes to such training not being a stated priority for frontline communities. To increase awareness and desirability while also helping improve outdoor worker health, we recommend the city create a centralized community-engaged heat training program. The UCLA Launch Program already runs such programming with trusted community leaders and would be a valuable partner to create and co-implement a city-run program. To ensure equitable access for frontline outdoor workers, training should be available for workers at different education levels and in different languages. And in addition to this, providing centralized training to increase awareness and desirability, the city should also create a universal toolkit that's accessible to all frontline outdoor workers. This will ensure that workers are fully aware of their rights and are able to lower the risk of heat-related illnesses in the workplace, even if they cannot access new or existing training. Next slide. So with that, we would just want to thank all of the CBOs and community members for sharing their wisdom with us. And next slide, we would also like to thank CEMO, Liberty Hill, and our UCLA advisors for their support in this work. And as Hannah mentioned earlier, this is just a glimpse into our work, and we look forward to sharing our full report publicly soon. Thank you.
Bravo, amazing. Thank you so very much for that glimpse of wonderful work that you did this year. I want to thank all of the students that worked on this project, all the MPP candidates that worked on this project. Andres, I think I'm going to transition it back to you because they're going to lead us into the discussion questions.
Awesome.
Correct?
Yes. exactly. Thank you, y'all. So I appreciate y'all. Thank you so much to all the speakers and to every perspective that y'all bring upon this like multifaceted issue. And so right now, with all these reflections that we carry, all the different perspectives that come up, we'll be moving into breakout room discussions, roughly of about 30 minutes. And so we'll be presenting 3 questions, each facilitated with different members of some of these organizations today, as well as additional folks who participated in the design. I'm going to share these questions in the chat as well, just so folks can have them present. The first question is asking, how do you, your family, friends, and neighbors experience heat at work? How does it affect the health and quality of life for you or your community? The second question is, how do you or your community deal with extreme heat at work? What are some solutions that you recommend? And the final question, which I recommend if all groups can make sure to at least touch base on this or touch point on some of these on this question, is what should be done to protect workers from extreme heat at work? What would you like to see local and state governments do to protect workers? Again, note takers will be just documenting the different points. Again, we won't be quoting anybody, but it's to get an idea and a sense of what are the priorities that you all are seeing and with yourselves in your own workplace, in the workplace of your loved ones, of your community, and help to identify these priorities and raise them as key issues that are coming up at the end of this Climate Equity LA series. And so we will be now dividing into English and Spanish breakout rooms, each with a facilitator and note taker who will be navigating these questions. Again, roughly since it's 30 minutes, I would recommend 10 minutes per question. And so now the time is 7:02. Let me just check with my co-lead here, Rebecca Guerra. How you doing, Rebecca, in terms of breakout rooms?
Thank you all. I'll be opening up the breakout rooms now. And I will note that if you are a monolingual English speaker and you've been moved into a Spanish room inadvertently, please feel free to come back into the main room and we're happy to reassign you. And now in Spanish, si usted está en un grupo que solamente habla inglés y usted prefiere o habla español, por favor, puede agregarse al este cuarto ahora donde estamos y yo te puedo mover a un cuarto de español. I'm now going to open the breakout rooms. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. This takes a couple of minutes, so we just implore your patience until we get everybody into their breakout sessions, which, by the way, are really inspiring. There's a lot of wisdom that's shared. And I've just learned so much when I just listen in on the breakout sessions. And then we're going to have a plenary report back once the breakout sessions are done. I want to take this small opportunity to thank everybody thus far. Amazing speakers, amazing information. And it's going to continue with our Heat Relief for LA campaign. And if you want to sign up for our campaign and be part of our network, Rebecca will share that link later to make sure that we're including everybody who wants to help spread the information. We will also be printing materials to make those accessible to locations that want to post the posters that we've created. And I just want to mention now that we used Lalo Alcaraz, the iconic cartoon artist, for the artwork that we've shared thus far for our Heat Relief for LA campaign.
And so with that, thank you y'all for super rich conversations. It was super insightful, and I just appreciated all the perspectives that came into that. And so I'm going to invite some of the facilitators to kind of share their thoughts. I'm going to invite 3 folks, starting off with Edgar, if you are available, followed by Theo, and then Roberto. I know, Theo, you had to go. Actually, Theo, do you feel comfortable sharing right now? I know you had a time commitment.
Oh, Ana Karen will be able to take the lead. Andres.
Perfect. Okay, cool then. Ana Karen, you want to go ahead and share out, and then followed by Edgar and then Roberto.
Thank you. We had a really rich conversation in breakout room 9, and a lot of the topics that came up really revolved around workers not having the option to really deal with extreme heat at work, and really that I think highlighting, as one of the speakers mentioned earlier, not really being able to have that more individualistic approach to dealing with extreme heat, and really the solutions that we need are going to have to be holistic. Many of the folks in our group work as promotoras, and it's really difficult to continue doing that important work under these conditions, and seeing the sharp contrast of being sent to communities that are more affluent, are more white, and feeling that difference when folks, are not able to cool down when they go back home to areas like South Central, like Westlake, and the struggles that have some of these areas having very little access to parks. The only parks that are in the communities are right now the base for a lot of folks who are suffering from homelessness and other mental health issues. And so really amplifying that need, that this is urgent. Many people that are doing this work have been in similar spaces, sharing their thoughts and priorities, but this is an urgent matter, and folks don't want empty promises. They want to see solutions coming from their input. And I think that's really important to highlight. So yeah, really grateful for the conversations that we had. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Ana Karen. Thank you. And so just hearing how folks are really the need to really address the immediate actions around extreme heat, which I think was similar issues. There are long-term investments like planting trees, but there are solutions that are needed right now to address extreme heat, especially for those who are facing more extreme heat in certain neighborhoods over others, or folks who are more maybe in housing precarious situations or more exposed to heat on a daily basis. So I appreciate those points. And then I think I'm going to invite Edgar, if you feel comfortable. Edgar, if you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, our group had some really great discussions and recommendations. I guess just first starting off with the representation of who's in these spaces and who's not. Right now, there are farm workers who are working tirelessly through the strawberry season right now. And so we need to be inclusionary to the farm workers who are on the grounds right now, going through working conditions. So I think just being mindful of more inclusionary practices and bringing them into these very important discussions. That was one form of a solution to that was provided and offered to our space. Another solution was having our decision makers push OSHA to update their update the regulations, worker protections from extreme heat to these new climate weather events. So as we're experiencing more extreme heat, as we experience them more longer and more deadlier, these OSHA protection laws need to reflect that this new climate that we're entering. So that's very important. Another one that that was so interesting and very thoughtful is around tenant protections as well. So as folks have seen in the news, heard in the news, there's been a mandate to have cities, homes in the city of LA to have air conditioning. One of the concerns that were brought up was that mandating homes is essentially allowing, will put pressure on landlords who are eventually can possibly put those cost burdens onto tenants. And so it's important that as we are trying to protect and regulate the homes and ensure that they are safe and habitable and resilient and provide relief for our most vulnerable. They're also providing tenant protections and to ensure that these technologies are not going to be the cost burdens of these technologies are not going to be pressuring on most vulnerable communities. We had another great concern or just a comment offered is that one of our wonderful folks in our group had offered to buy their mother, who was an elder, an AC unit, and later to find out that the AC unit was not being used because of those extreme utility bills. So it's important to keep all these recommendations in mind of how we are looking into utility bills, how we're ensuring that we have tenant protections for our community to ensure that they are not having to deal with these cost burdens from landlords, and also updating these regulations and policies to adapt also to the extreme climate events. So those are the recommendations that are offered into my space.
Super appreciate that, Edgar. I think we're hearing this recurring theme of like who isn't and who isn't considered when we're thinking about health protections, for example, agricultural workers, as you mentioned, and also the needs of elders who really struggle paying utility rates. We can, demand, or we can, air conditioning can be required in buildings, but if there isn't the appropriate protections, or if there isn't the appropriate support, then some of these air conditioning units may not be very effective, or folks can't even use them if utility rates are just too high or inaccessible for a lot of community members. I think we were hearing kind of similar themes as well throughout. So super appreciate you, Edgar. Thank you. And then also, just as we're having these conversations and kind of wrapping up, feel free to share any key takeaways that came up in the chat, please, y'all. I invite all of y'all to just share any key points, any key reflections that came up. And then now, I'm going to bring in the incredible Roberto, or his twin, whichever one wants to speak.
Whichever one has more hair, right?
I didn't mean to laugh.
So, no, that's good. I mean, you laugh. So in our team, we struggled a little bit to sort of like focus on the questions. People were already giving like recommendations, which I think were awesome. But some of the things that came out of that conversation was changing work times to avoid extreme heat days. I think that was interestingly looking at, if these extreme heat days are not working and people are at risk, maybe switching up the times. I think that takes a bigger conversation, a bigger commitment from corporations who own companies, right? Either private or bigger known corporations, for them to make a commitment, right? To change times for workers. Some folks identified more hydrating stations and possibly fruits that can help hydrate. In one of those attempts to try to refocus the question, I mentioned delivery drivers, and folks were like, yes, recently we had a couple of deaths. I think last year we had death from maybe a UPS or a FedEx driver. But I mentioned, for folks who order things on Amazon, a lot of these drivers drive vans that are either sub-leased, not directly from Amazon, and not always do they have air conditioning. So some people identified like, hey, leaving drinks outside for delivery drivers when they go take something to your home, at least have something for them to take a refreshment or cold drink. Another thing that came out, folks were also identified, that not all folks have the ability to take breaks or go under a shade. Specifically, folks who also have to kind of monitor their use of AC because of high electricity charges. Another key takeaway that came up is like understanding that there are laws existing in the books to protect folks. However, the resources aren't there to really accommodate the need for inspectors. So one key takeaway was like, maybe we should be, looking at elected officials in Sacramento or champions that can look towards increasing funds specifically to get more inspectors, since there aren't that many, especially not many that are Spanish speaking. So that's the bulk of where the conversation. When I think it's great when people start thinking about other solutions immediately, and that's what we experience in our team.
Thanks so much, Roberto. I think what we're hearing, or what came out, seems to be a fundamental to reshift of how we're thinking about labor. I really love the idea of like, how are we shifting away from traditional like 9 to 5s, especially as the season changes, but the work hours don't seem to. They don't really consider either daylight changes, more sun exposure, or even seasonal and temperature changes. And then I think too, to that last point that you're mentioning, how is the state and governments investing in enforcement and regulation and inspection around labor, which I think was a key piece. And so I thank you all for these excellent points too. I just want to highlight some as well that came up in my conversations. Some folks highlighted some immediate solutions of bringing umbrellas out, providing, just bringing out water, using like businesses as well. But we are also hearing just the need to reinvest in a lot of the green spaces that are available, especially for workers who are outdoors, who may need a break or a pause, may need to find some aspect of shade. We spoke on the mental health impacts and the need for example, day laborers who may be waiting, maybe looking for work. Where are the spaces for them? How are we also repurposing things like worker centers and other community spaces to be able to be used for workers in extreme heat situations? And yeah, I think there was just a lot of rich conversations, and I appreciate a lot of these recurring themes that we're hearing, particularly from those most impacted and workers who are facing a lot of these extreme heat impacts. And so with that, I see we're at 7:48. I think then if I can invite Michelle Pritchard to share any final thoughts, conclusions as we wrap up today's event.
Sure, thank you so much, Andres and everyone. And it was really a vibrant program with our presenters earlier in the evening, and then those great report backs from the discussion groups. You know, the work of the CEMO office and Marta Segura's role as Chief Heat Officer really could not be more timely and more crucial for all of us here in Los Angeles. And you know, the ideas that were generated tonight will all be factored into the city's process, which is going to be ongoing and upcoming, to develop a heat action plan so that we can be working on creative solutions for the most vulnerable among us. What I took away from tonight is that it's really all about health. Aretha reminded us from Scope that that the health impacts are, of course, physical, but they are mental health impacts as well. We know that emergency room visits go up, and we know that extreme heat really amplifies and exacerbates the social and economic stressors that, that low-income communities and communities of color face every day, especially in South LA, East LA, and the harbor. There's a huge role for the city to play. We heard lots of great ideas tonight, but educating employers, helping to enforce some of the rules and practices that we know can protect people, educating healthcare providers themselves, educating the third sector of nonprofit organizations who have a deep reach into many communities, and also working alongside of unions to help get the word out and also develop creative solutions. And then lastly, I think we heard that we need to think about workers in a holistic way. They go to work, they come home, and back again, and back again. And so the commute is a very important part of protecting against extreme heat, as well as whatever we can do in the workplace and at home. So too much to recap here this evening, but we did want to leave you on a note of some actions that everyone here tonight can take. And Rebecca, I don't know if we have a slide deck to go along with this or not. I'll just start in. But first of all, you can visit the Climate Emergency Mobilization website and sign up for the Heat Relief for LA campaign. Here it is. There's going to be lots of resources, early warnings that people can learn about and help to promote. Secondly, we heard from Enrique about legislation and policy and regulatory changes that are coming up in Sacramento. And I know that we're going to get that information out to people. There are public hearings coming up soon, and we hope you will that you will weigh in personally to encourage Cal OSHA and Office of Planning and Research to take more protections for workers during periods of extreme heat. And then lastly, we hope that everyone will sign up and come back for our next session, which is taking place on June 29th, our next public Zoom workshop, which will really focus in on how, asking your direction and advice and feedback on how the city can best communicate with the public, with low-income communities, as we head into the very extreme heat period of the summer. We'll be thinking about unhoused residents and the homeless, the elderly, people who are living in isolated situations. So getting ideas for how to communicate in advance and how to communicate about all the resources that are available to help protect individuals, households, and communities. So with that, Marta, I think I turn it back over to you just for any closing thoughts that you might have. And thanks to everyone for a great program.
Thank you, Michelle, for those amazing final words and summaries. I really appreciate your collaboration. This Climate Equity LA series really would not have been the same without your support and without the support of the Liberty Hill Foundation, who really did help incubate this series. So thank you for all of that as well. I want to thank again our speakers, Patricia Rizzo, Enrique Huerta, Aretha Wormsley, Kevin Riley, and all the organizations that were here today, and everyone who helped facilitate, Hannah and Selena and the entire UCLA MPP group that created the focus group report, which we will be sharing in the near future so that you can have all of the great information and quotes, both qualitative and quantitative, that they came up with regards to extreme heat and vulnerable communities. And I also want you to look out for all the social media toolkits that we'll be sharing with our partners and organizations that are working with us for the Heat Relief for LA campaign. We're collaborating with the LA Regional Climate Collaborative and organizations like Climate Resolve and Communities for a Better Environment, Scope LA, and just so many. There's over 70 organizations that will be participating in sharing that information. And we have just begun. This is just the beginning. I also want to thank everybody from the state government who was here today, Braden Kay and Lisa Sue, and so many others that were, Craig Tranby from DWP, that were here to be a resource to our members, to our community. So I promise you that whatever resources you share with CEMO, we will share with the broader community, because we're here to support one another, to work together, to end the harm from extreme heat and climate change, and to create a more equitable, thriving, healthy Los Angeles and California. So thank you again, everybody. It makes me feel good to be, inspired to be in this tribe of amazing people who are here to help our Los Angeles and our vulnerable communities to really thrive. So thanks again, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and we're here for you. Just reach out. Thank you.